Hughie Fury versus Fred Kassi. For those of you who don't know, the fight was stopped, I believe, in the 7th round. Hughie Fury sustained a bad cut over his eye, which came after an accidental headbutt from Fred Kassi in the 6th round. So the fight was stopped. I believe the referee waved it off because of the cut, and they went to the scorecards. Upon going to the scorecards, Hughie Fury had won by a wide points decision. Now, I'm going to try and give a balanced viewpoint as to this fight. Let me start with the positives. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to say this fight was a barrel of laughs, but I'm going to start with the positives and I'll move on to areas for improvement afterwards. The positives are, Fred Kassi is a tried and tested opponent at this world level. He's been in with the likes of Amir Mansour, Dominic Breazeale, Chris Arreola, all of those sort of guys who are rated somewhere between 20 and 40 of the heavyweight division. Guys who are on a par with Hughie Fury in my estimations based on current ratings. And I'm going to say, I have not seen any of them win as comfortably over Fred Kassi as Hughie Fury did tonight. On my card, Hughie Fury was winning every single round. He was completely negating the Fred Kassi game. I looked at Fred Kassi versus Dominic Breazeale fight before this, and Fred Kassi was giving Breazeale real problems because he was able to get under the Breazeale jab, he was able to walk Breazeale down, he was able to get on the inside, duck under his jab, get inside and launch like awkward power shots. He couldn't do that to the same extent with Hughie Fury whatsoever. Firstly, Hughie Fury's jab was a lot quicker, snappier than what Breazeale was able to offer. And secondly, and perhaps more importantly, the footwork from Hughie Fury was a class above, what Breazeale had. Breazeale was slow-footed, lumbering, ponderous. Hughie Fury was the general in there. He was controlling it as much with his feet as he was with his hands. And some of the pivoting, some of the fast footwork was, really, really on point. And Hughie was, really calm, really patient, really controlled in there. Very much the ring general, very much confident, and really, really dominant. Let's move on to... So let's put it that way. So, even though this fight ended in round 7, to me this had a sort of 12-round unanimous points decision written all over it. Hughie wasn't hurting Fred. Fred wasn't landing much of note on Hughie. It's hard to say because we didn't see the fight, but if I had to pick, I would say I would have ended up scoring this fight 12-0 based on the first 7 rounds. However, the nature of how this fight ended was unfortunate. For a start, Hughie sustained a bad cut, and that's possibly going to keep him outside of the ring for some time. It's going to mean he may have to refrain from sparring for some time. I'm not an expert on these things, but I would presume it puts his space on the undercard for the Tyson Fury-Vladimir Klitschko fight in great doubt. I understand he had another appearance billed on a Box Nation card, which again would be in great jeopardy after this. So it's unfortunate because I know Hughie wanted to stay busy, I know what he wanted to increase his level of opposition, and I know he wanted to get some more experience under his belt in the oncoming few months, and the cuts probably put that in jeopardy. Secondly, the performance itself, whilst as hardcore boxing fans who've seen Fred Kassi against other opponents, we can appreciate some of the subtleties of his game. We can appreciate the jab and the improvement and the movement. I've got to say the performance itself was hardly electrifying, and part of me thinks, I know Hughie Fury is not an Anthony Joshua or a Mike Tyson or a David Tua in terms of the style he brings to the ring. Part of me thinks this was somewhat of a missed opportunity. His first time headlining a card on Box Nation, and it was just a performance that won't stick in fans' memories. And this is slightly why I was somewhat critical of picking Fred Kassi as the opponent. I understand why they bought in Fred Kassi. I understand he's durable. I understand he was probably affordable as an opponent. But he was never going to provide the most interesting fight. And it's unfortunate that on Hughie's first step up to main event status, he was getting booed from the crowd, and he put in a performance which was forgettable. I think one of the things Hughie perhaps didn't do so much in this fight is, whilst he was winning, and whilst he was winning comfortably, he didn't really ever put the pedal to the metal. You know, he didn't ever look like he was taking his game to the next level in there. You know, he looked like a guy who was very confident, very comfortable, and happy with the way the fight was going. And we've seen this a few times before with Hughie. We saw it in the recent Dominic Gwynn fight, from what I've seen of that. You know, he seems like a guy who's very composed in there, very thoughtful in there, very reflective in the ring, and he doesn't necessarily go through the gears so much. You know, he's very happy to pick and work behind the jab and cruise through fights. And I think fundamentally he perhaps lacks the X factor and perhaps lacks the excitement that a Tyson Fury brings to the ring. You know, with Tyson Fury, there's that air of unpredictability, there's that vulnerability, there's the idea that you don't know what fight Tyson's going to fight. Is he going to be orthodox? Is he going to be southpaw? Is he going to be inside? Is he going to be outside? Is he going to get into a brawl? Is he going to fight long range? You know, with Hughie, he's very much a sort of outside, long range, sniper, boxer, jabber type. And I think it's unfortunate that the fight was so, it was a fight that could have put a glass eye to sleep. I think that's partly unfortunate, and I think, you know, the fact that this was his debut as a headliner, his debut on Box Nation, and, it ended up with the crowd booing, and, it is unfortunate again. The win over Fred Kassi is a good win to have on his record. Fred Kassi's one of the best opponents Hughie's beaten. You know, I wouldn't say that Fred Kassi was quite as good as Rudenko, but, you know, Fred Kassi is thereabouts. A lot of people feel he was very hard done by against Brazil, very hard done by against Ariola, and Hughie took care of him in decisive fashion. It would have been nice to see the fight go a bit longer. It would have been nice to see Hughie mix it up a bit more, maybe try and do a few things different, maybe try and force the pace a bit more. But then again, you know, he is only 22. I think he's only 21 actually. He's only 21. Absolute baby in terms of the heavyweight division. There's a long way to go, and there's absolutely no need to rush him. I think it's going to be hard for Box Nation to sell subscriptions and Frank Warren to sell tickets with Hughie Fury as a headliner at this point, unless there are a substantial increase in opposition for Fred Kassi. You know, at this point, maybe Hughie is more of a co-main event fighter, because the style that he fights and the level that he's fighting at probably isn't carrying top of the bill status for my money just yet. But I don't want to be too harsh on it. You know, it wasn't an entertaining fight. He maybe could have pushed a bit harder. The end was a bit disappointing, but he handled a guy like Fred Kassi. You know, Dominic Breazeale's fighting for a world title in his next fight, and he handled him a lot more comfortably than Breazeale did, as we know. Perhaps the fact that the Jamie Conlon Nelson fight was the fight before didn't help this fight. I'm going to do a video on the undercard after the Liam Walsh fight, and I'm going to mention that, but that was a fight of the year contender. In fact, that was a fight of the year winner. Let's put it that way. It's one of the best fights I've seen. You know, drama, all action, knockdowns on both sides. What a story! I'm going to try and cover that in a video where I discuss all the undercard fights separately. But yeah, I think the fact that it came after that didn't do too much credit. You know, it probably reflected badly in comparison. Everyone's adrenaline was pumping after that fight to move on to a fight like this. But you know, Hughie's got real tools, he's got real skill, he's young, he's improving, he's gradually stepping up the level of opposition. But for me, there is a sense that there could be another level to his game if he put a bit more. Very sound defensively, very sound behind the jab, very sound movement-wise. You know, some good body punching, some decent variety. Is there the level of excitement? Is there the sort of next level offense? that we're going to need to see as he moves up in class? That's the question. Let me know your thoughts. Was this a good performance? Was it a disappointing performance? If you've enjoyed this video, do hit the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, please do subscribe.